Most of you are just consuming a lot of English, and because of that, you are at the intermediate plateau. You watch hours of English content. You understand everything, or almost everything, but the moment you need to speak in a professional setting, you freeze. The problem here isn't your talent, it's your routine. You don't need more input at this stage. You need a production protocol. 25 years ago, when I was starting out, I had the luxury of spending hours studying every day. But I know that you don't. You have a career, a family, and zero time to waste. So today, I'm giving you my exact 30-minute high-performance protocol for B2 and C1 English learning. This is a 7-step daily framework designed to shift you from a passive listener to a C1 producer of English. No games, no fluff, just 30 minutes of precision work. So, let's get into step 1. All right, so I have here the steps on my phone. Let me give you step 1 of this protocol. The first step is the quick review. You're going to spend 5 minutes on this. Check it out. Don't start something new until you've anchored the old. Spend the first 5 minutes of your 30 doing active recall. Close your notebook or your laptop. Try to explain what you learned yesterday out loud to an empty room. If you can't explain it simply, you haven't mastered it yet. You know, I always talk about the importance of revision, review. Think of learning as building a wall. And each new lesson you cover, each new topic you learn or study is a little brick that you lay to form that wall. But here's the thing. By reviewing constantly, you are ensuring that the bricks you've already laid remain there. So that's the first thing you have to do in a 30-minute session. Spend the first 5 minutes trying to recall what you studied, what you learned yesterday. For example, let's say that yesterday you focused on phrasal verbs and you learned 3 phrasal verbs yesterday. Today, before starting your session, spend the first 5 minutes remembering those phrasal verbs. What were the phrasal verbs that I learned yesterday again? Okay, this one, and that one. All right? Also, try this exercise of teaching to an empty room by yourself, imagining that you are explaining what these phrasal verbs mean to a person who don't know them or who doesn't know them. I've always shared here on the channel how much English teaching, has helped me, how much being a teacher has helped improve my language level, my proficiency level. So you don't have to be an English teacher. You don't have to become an English teacher to do this, but you can definitely practice explaining things you are learning to an empty room or even to a family member or close friend that you have regular contact with. This is very good for your brain. It forces you to not only remember what you've covered, but also think of ways to explain it, come up with sentences as examples to illustrate that target language. So that's step number 1, the quick review of the day. Always review what you learned the previous day, all right? Now, step number 2 is what I call the pre-lesson reflection. Check it out. Before you touch a new lesson or a new topic, prime your brain. Ask yourself, what do I already know about this topic? What is my biggest frustration with this topic? First, this activates your existing knowledge about the topic. Second, this creates a mental gap that your brain will be desperate to fill. You're no longer a student. You're an analyst looking for data, all right? So if you do this pre-reflection, you might be surprised with how much you already know about that topic, about the world in general. Before you start a new lesson, it's very important that you take a couple of minutes to think about this. What do I already know about this subject, about this topic? And again, you might be surprised with how much you already know. Also, that creates a mental gap. You might realize, okay, I know this and that, but I'm still not sure about this. You see, that creates the mental gap that now you will fill in our study session. All right. Let me give an example here. Let's say that your topic for today that you chose is 10 words you can use in a professional email. That's the topic of your lesson today. All right. Before starting the lesson and learning the 10 words, the 10 new words, think to yourself for about 2 minutes. Okay, if I were to write a professional email now, how would I do it? What words would I use? How would I open the email? How would I write the body of the email? How would I close the email? You see, this is the pre-lesson reflection. So spend 2 minutes on this, reflecting on what you already know. So far, we have already used up 7 minutes of our 30. The first 5 minutes, it's a quick review on the topic that you learned the previous day. And 2 minutes for this pre-lesson reflection. Think about what you already know or what you struggle with regarding the topic of the day. Now, before we move into the actual training, a reality check. I'm giving you this 7-step protocol for free because it works. But let's be honest, setting this up by yourself manually every day, finding the videos you're going to use, building the exercises, engineering the right AI prompts every single day, this is just high friction manual labor. And that is exactly why I built the B2 Edge app. If you want this entire 30-minute protocol automated and personalized for you by my AI coach, just click the link in the description because he handles the heavy lifting so you can focus on the performance. But look, if you want to do it the DIY way, do it yourself, no problem. Let's move on to step 3 and continue. All right, now we move on to step 3. Step 3 is the actual lesson or topic of the day. Check it out. You're going to spend 10 minutes on this, and it's going to be a split of 5 minutes each. Let me explain. Listen. This is the core of your session. You have 10 minutes total. 5 minutes of high-intensity input, for example, watching a targeted video or reading a professional text, followed immediately by 5 minutes of consolidation exercises. If you spend 20 minutes watching a video, you've already failed the protocol because you've slipped back into the consumer mode. Keep it lean, keep it fast, all right? Always remember, quality over quantity. So let me give you an example here. Imagine the topic that you chose to focus on today is the third conditional. The third conditional. So the first 5 minutes, you're going to deliberately have input on that structure. It could be a short YouTube video lesson explaining the third conditional. You can go to Google, for example, and search for third conditional explanation. You're going to find a lot of blogs and websites that already have the explanation online there for you to read. Or even if you have a grammar book, just use the grammar book and read the explanation about the third conditional and some example sentences there. Just spend 5 minutes doing this. Then the other 5 minutes, you're going to do a few consolidation exercises to actually practice using the third conditional. How do you do these exercises? Well, if you're using a grammar book, do the exercises in the grammar book. If you are online, you can ask AI to generate a few exercises for you to practice third conditional. You can even Google, a simple Google search, third conditional online exercises. Again, there's a bunch of free websites that you can use to do those exercises. So remember, it's 5 minutes of deliberate study and practice, could be with a book, with an article, with a video, and then 5 minutes to do some consolidation exercises. I always say that if you don't use it, you lose it. So have that type of mindset. Whenever you learn something new, a new word, a new expression, a new grammar structure, use it immediately, okay? Use it immediately, because if you don't use it, you lose it. As soon as you're done with the 5 minutes of explanation and theory, you gotta use it immediately to start activating that new information in your brain, all right? So you're gonna spend 10 minutes on this, 5 for input and theory, and 5 for consolidation exercises. Now we move on to the most exciting part, in my opinion, which is the production phase of the process. You know, if you are stuck at a B1 level and you want to move up to B2 and C1 levels of English, you have to produce more language and consume less language. You have to flip that around. Probably the reason you feel stuck is because you have been consuming more and producing less. You want to flip that. You want to produce more language and still consume English. Yes, of course, but consume less. So now we move on to the practical production aspect of the protocol. So far, we have already spent 17 minutes of our 30, right? The first 7 minutes for reflection and review, and the 10 minutes actually for the lesson, all right? Now, step 4 is what I call the monologue, the 1 minute monologue. Check it out. You're going to spend 2 minutes on this. This is where the transformation happens. Record yourself for 60 seconds using the grammar or vocabulary from step 3. In other words, the target language. No script, just raw production. Then listen back and analyze your own delivery, your own presentation of ideas. Let me give you an example here. Imagine today, in your 10-minute session, you learned 3 new idioms in step 3. The idioms were a dime a dozen, bury the hatchet, and to be over the moon. Great. Now that you've already studied the theory, you've done a couple of exercises practicing these expressions, you're going to do the production thing, the monologue. You could go something like this. Well, I'm going to talk about my last trip for 1 minute. So grab your phone and record yourself talking about your last trip for 1 minute. All right? And in your recording, try to use or challenge yourself to use at least 2 of these idioms that you learned today. You see? After you do that, then you listen back and you become your own critic. You give yourself feedback. Think about how well you answered the prompt. Think about if you were able to use correctly the 2 idioms that you were supposed to use. All right? By the way, if you are already using the B2 Edge, my app, this is already automatically done for you. Every day, there's already this activity built in the curriculum. So the app knows your history, the app knows your strengths and weaknesses, and every day it generates a 1 minute speaking monologue with a topic for you to just record yourself doing it and speaking about that topic. But the cool thing is that right after you submit it, you get instant feedback from the AI coach, which I trained and is already built in the app. The AI coach is going to evaluate your whole response and also offer you suggestions of better vocabulary, better words that you could have used. Better B2 level words, better C1 level words. So just a thought, yeah, the app already does this thing automatically for you, but you can do it yourself as well. Step number 5, still on the production phase of our protocol, is the AI conversation practice. You're going to spend 5 minutes on this. So you spend 2 minutes on the monologue, right? And now you're going to spend 5 minutes practicing conversation with AI, all right? Let me read it for you. Look, you need to simulate the stress of a real interaction. So go to an AI tool and ask it to role play a specific scenario with you. Here are some examples of scenarios you can do with AI. A job interview, ordering food at a restaurant, talking about your favorite movie, you see? So this is when you move from theory to practice. And nowadays with AI, it's very easy for you to simulate real life conversations, real life scenarios. So you can feel that stress of having to keep up in a conversation. Again, my app, the B2 Edge, generates this role play activity for you every day automatically based on your history with the app and also on your weak points that you want to focus on. So this is already done automatically on the B2 Edge app. If you're not using the app, that's okay too. You just have to become very good at prompting your AI tool to do this for you, okay? To generate these role play scenarios. But make sure you spend 5 minutes role playing a scenario with AI. You will see how much your production level, your English will improve by doing this. Then we move on to step 6, which is still focused on production. Step 6 is the read aloud task. Again, you're going to spend 5 minutes on this. Listen, C1 fluency isn't just about words, it's about prosody. You know, prosody is the rhythm, the music of the language, how you use your voice to communicate, your intonation. Ask your AI to generate a short story using your target language and read it out loud with maximum projection. Let me give an example here. Let's say today you'll learn different adjectives to refer to people, like self-aware, introverted, gregarious. Then you ask your AI tool to generate a short story, a paragraph, using that target vocabulary. Now you're going to practice reading that paragraph out loud, but your focus now is on your delivery, your prosody, all right? Again, record yourself and listen back. Do you like the way you read? Do you like the way you delivered the information? Could you sound a little bit more exciting, a little bit more engaged? So all these questions you got to ask yourself when analyzing your work critically, all right? But this is also very important. I talk about the importance of reading things out loud all the time. I used to do that a lot, and I think it really helped me develop my speaking skills in general, you know? So it's this idea of reading a text out loud, imagining that you are reading to an audience, but that audience cannot see the text that you're reading. They're only relying on you, on your voice projection, on your presentation skills. So having that mental picture in mind is going to help you do well with this activity here, the read aloud activity. All right, we've just covered steps 4, 5, and 6, which focus heavily on language production. And you're going to spend the most of your protocol actually doing this, producing language, right? But we still have 1 minute left. If you do the calculations here, you will realize that it's only 29 minutes in. There's still 1 minute left. So what are you going to do in this last 1 minute? Well, you're going to do step 7, which is the takeaway. You're going to spend 1 minute on your takeaway. End your 30 minutes by recording a 30-second voice memo. What is the one thing you remember tomorrow? This final encoding step is what makes the progress stick to your identity. You know, this is something that I always do with my students, especially back when I used to teach private students more regularly. I would always end the class asking them for the takeaway. Okay, everybody, all right, we have just finished our session. So before we go, what is your one takeaway from today's class, from today's session? And it was always great because, you know, some students would name a word that caught their attention during the session that was new for them, that they learned. Oh, that word, I'm going to remember it, you know, next class or tomorrow. Other students would name a feeling. Maybe something like, oh, Thiago, you know, when I started the class today, I was a little bit low on energy. I was a little bit tired and stressed out, but now at the end, I feel much more relaxed. I feel better about my English. So yeah, that's my takeaway, this feeling. So it could be anything. It could be a word, a structure, a feeling, an idea, all right? But make sure you always end your study session of the day with this one question. What is your number one takeaway from that session? You see, it's also related to reflection again. I think that the best learners are the ones who are able to regularly reflect on their learning. It's not just about doing things all the time or learning new things all the time. I think that many students fail at reviewing content that has already been covered, they've already seen, and also reflecting on their own learning, all right? So these are the 7 steps of this high performance protocol for B2 and C1 practice. Let's just recap here very quickly. So steps 1 and 2 is all about priming your brain. The first 5 minutes, you're going to review the content from the previous session. What do you remember about it? Then, for the next 2 minutes, you're going to do the pre-lesson reflection. Pick the topic that you chose for the day and ask yourself, what do I already know about this topic? Do I struggle with anything specifically about this topic? Is there something I still don't know and I have to learn about this topic? All right, 2 minutes for this. Then we move on to the main course or the main lesson. You're going to spend 10 minutes here. This is step 3. All right. So in your main lesson section, you're going to spend 10 minutes here, but you're going to split it. Remember, 5 and 5. The first 5 minutes is just input, theory. All right. A lesson. And the next 5 minutes, consolidation exercises. All right. To use what you're learning immediately. Then we move on to the most exciting part of the framework, the protocol, which is the production part. There are 3 steps only for production. So step 4, the 1-minute monologue. Remember? Record yourself for 1 minute talking about a topic, and in your monologue, you try to use the target language of the day. Then you're going to move on to step 5, which is simulating an AI conversation, a conversation with your AI tool. Different role play scenarios, but spend 5 minutes simulating a real life scenario. And of course, as you talk about that scenario with your AI tool, try to use the target language of the day as much as possible. Then you're going to move on to step 6, also about production, which is the read aloud task. You're going to spend 5 minutes here reading a short story, a paragraph out loud, using the target language of the day, but this time focusing on your prosody, on your delivery, your presentation skills. And finally, you're going to end the session, step 7, which is the takeaway. Spend 1 minute reflecting on what your main takeaway from that session is. What is the one thing you want to remember for the next day? Now you have the protocol and 2 choices to make. Number 1, you can go out and spend hours every day hunting for the right materials and prompts yourself. Or number 2, you can just open the B2 Edge, log in, and let me and my AI coach guide you through this exact protocol in around 30 minutes of your day. The choice here is between manual labor and optimized growth. The B2 Edge app helps you buy back one of the most valuable things nowadays, time. But a word of warning, producing language is hard. If you finish your 30 minutes and you feel relaxed, you did it wrong. If your brain doesn't feel slightly fried and your mouth muscles don't feel tired, you weren't practicing the right way. You are just passing time. Remember, real growth only happens in the zone of discomfort. You gotta feel a little uncomfortable. So stop consuming and start producing. Click the link below to join the B2 Edge, and I'll see you inside the app. I'm Thiago. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll talk to you in the next video.